to the C.S. Joseph podcast. My name's John, and today we're going to do an intro episode for a series that I'll be doing, and this series is called How to Deal with Other People's Critic Functions. Now, where did the desire to do this series come from? It came from actually a Facebook post from one of the members. It was just a number of years ago, at least two, I think. One of the members in the Facebook group. And if you guys know who I'm talking about or remember the name, post it in the comments. I wasn't able to find it recently, so let us know if you remember. Anyway, so this person was describing, was addressing this conception about, what is the thing that that kind of connects us with people? What is the thing that gets us into a status of being respected by other people, especially new people? When we meet new people, what function or what interaction is the thing that is blocking the respect and then facilitates the respect? And this person said, I think it was a he, said that it's the critic function, and that it's not the inferior function, it's not how well you perform, it's not how heroic you are with your hero, it's not how innocent your child is. It's if you can get past and deal with another person's critic function and pass the test of the critic, then that is the thing that's going to cultivate respect, is going to cultivate connection, is going to lead to trust with the other person, right? And I thought this was a profound insight when I was reading this a couple of years ago. I thought it was really helpful and really interesting, and that was a seed that was planted in my mind a few years ago that is now leading me to talk to you guys today with this intro episode about basically how to address other people's critic functions, right? Another person's critic function. So the first question we have to ask, we have to understand the critic's perspective of where the critic is coming from, right? Because as John Beebe talks about in his book Energies and Patterns of Psychological Type, he goes over each of these energetic archetypes, the hero, the parent, the child, etc. And the critic is one that operates from this critical energy, right? I believe he refers to her as the Phoenix too, kind of something like the old witch, who's maybe a bit conniving and definitely negative usually and critical. So we have to ask, what is the critic's perspective? And if we were to put the perspective of the critic into a person, it's something like the grandparent, right? We refer to it as the senile elder. And the image that I like to use for what the critic is or who the critic is some old lady or old man rocking on a rocking chair, sewing or knitting, and just kind of looking at the world and just saying, things are not like they used to be, or kids these days, they don't know what they have, or things like that, right? It's this inborn kind of ingratitude, but also this critical eye of everything that they see. There's reasons to tear it down, there's reasons to denigrate it, right? And one of the really important points to understand the critic is to look at the critic in a broader reflection, right? And this is where this question is here, the critic's deepest hope. What is that deepest hope? And one of the most helpful items when we talk about cognitive reflection, right, which is the two functions that are opposing each other that create this tension within our minds. Cognitive reflection reveals kind of the deeper journey of each of the functions, right? So what is the critic in reflection with? It's in reflection with the child function, which at first may seem odd, of the innocent child and the very senile, the potentially senile, but the critical, skeptical, ungrateful critic. These exist on in tension with each other. But like all the reflection functions, as Chase says, there's like a little bit of the demon and the hero within that reflection. There's a little bit of the trickster in the parent. There's a little bit of the nemesis in the inferior, and there is a bit of the child in the critic. And one of the ways to think about this is we could look at it from the reverse way first. There's a little bit of the critic in the child. While the child's innocent and kind of has this sort of divinity to them because of their innocence, children can be very critical, right? Because they're so honest, because they don't really have a filter. Children do have an element of the critic in them, just as our child functions have elements of the critic function in them as well. We become innocent maybe, but innocently critical, right? And that being innocent and being honest and having that spark of divinity, right? You can't have that completely without having a little bit of the critic in there, right? And that is why the child function, that's why I believe the child function leads to transformation in the end, because there's still a focus on improvement, right? Which is kind of the infusion of the critic in there. But the critic has a similar relationship. It actually has some of the child in there. And I think this is the key to understanding and empathizing and sympathizing with the critic, both with critical people and with our own critic and with other people's critic. That the critic, their deepest hope, if they allow themselves to admit what that is to reintegrate the nature of the child within them, right? To experience youth again, to experience innocence again, to experience a bit of carelessness maybe. And you see this with old people, with people who are elderly, especially as they get a little more senile. They kind of have this, they become childlike again in some ways, right? And that's kind of the arc of the human life, where the state we are at the beginning of life and at the end of life kind of mirror each other in some really similar ways. So the critic's deepest hope, again, when it allows itself to experience some of that hope, is to be reintegrated with the child, right? So more practically now of what is the mechanism to deal with other people's critic functions? Because the critic's perspective is critical by default and skeptical by default, what is the critic looking for? Now, the way I set this up and the way we talked about the critic in the past and the way that John Beebe talks about the critic function in his book, it almost seems at first like an unbeatable foe. Like there's no way you can get past people's critic function. It's already decided what you are. And with the really senile critic functions, that's maybe true. People who have dug themselves and twisted so deep into their inherent skepticism that sometimes you can't reach that person, or you can't reach that function. But for the most part, the people that I've met, young or old, there's still something alive in their critic function that's looking, that's hoping, that's holding out for something. And the answer to what is the critic looking for in other people is quite simple. It's effort. It's effort. The critic function is looking for, with whatever function it's aware of, TE critic, NE critic, SE critic, whatever. It's looking for proof of awareness, proof of care, proof of effort in other people. So, for example, TE critics with the ENTPs and the ESTPs, they don't usually mind if you're not the smartest. They don't usually mind if you're maybe have trouble thinking. What they mind is pride. What they mind is this being closed-minded, is being closed off to learning more or expanding one's knowledge, right? But the thing that really bothers the critic, especially TE critic, is when other people decide that they know enough, right? And that's kind of why, one of the reasons why the critic function exists is because it's trying to look at the people who have the humility and the willingness to admit when they're ignorant, or the willingness to be ignorant if proven wrong, right? And then that gives the critic the opportunity to share its wisdom with that person, right? So in short, the critic is looking for effort. It's looking for other people to care about the things that the critic cares about and to respect the critic's wisdom, to respect the critic's perspective. And this, while it may seem simple, it's not always easy to prove to the person that, that you are respecting their critic function, right? So, for example, with SE critic, there's coaches or leaders or a lot of administrators who are ESTJs with SE Critic, right? And ESTJs, they usually put in a lot of effort with their SI parent, right? They're all about routine. They're all about giving effort to the things that they want to invest in, or that they feel they should invest in. SE Critic can be hard to get past because it's like they're looking not only at your appearance, not only on whether you're put together or not, but they're looking for proof of effort, kind of literal effort in this case. They're looking for, is that person on a path that they are investing effort towards improving, towards getting better, towards putting in the work, right? And this is one of the reasons, if you're thinking about a natural pair or a bronze pair between the ESTJ and the INFJ, for example, or the ESFJ and the INTJ, the SE Critic is looking at the INJs, and if the INJs are focused on a path and they're putting effort into their path, right, then it's pretty easy for the SE Critic to like take a deep breath and be like, okay, that person's on a path. I'm going to at least, maybe open myself up to them a little bit. And the reason why that's kind of easy for the INJs, easy-ish, is because when they're focused on the path, they naturally are kind of have the highest standards for self-effort with their SI demon. So that's just one example of how the critic interacts with other people's types, right? And this is one way which the ENTP and the ESFJ, for example, with TE Critic to TI inferior, often butt heads, because the ESFJ is trying to convince themselves that they know enough and that they've done enough research, and that the TE Critic's always kind of putting pressure on that TI inferior to be like, have you thought about this? I don't think you really thought that through carefully, right? And ENTPs, if they want to cultivate a respectful relationship with an ESFJ, have to be aware that ESFJ, that they need space to think through things on their own, right? And not just to tell them you're wrong, but actually to ask questions and to embrace the more extroverted thinking role. So for recap, just that this is the beginning of what will be an individual set of videos where we go through one critic at a time. How to deal with the ESTPs and the ENTP's critic, how to deal with the ENFP and the ESFP's FE critic. But we'll also talk about obviously the introverted critics too. And introverted critics are going to be a little bit more complicated to deal with within this topic matter of how to deal with other people's critic, right? Because how do you deal with someone else's critic that has an introverted critic that is more critical within, right? Because we still have to deal with other people's internal critics if we're going to cultivate that respect, cultivate that connection with them, right? So that is going to be an important binary to walk through. That yes, the rules are a little bit different when you're dealing with someone else's critic function. So this last bit about the critic and the parent, there's this deeper connection here between the orbit between the parent and the critic and the rest of our psyche, the rest of our functions, and that the parent and the critic are the two. This orbit is the linchpin orbit for our mind's integration, for the orderly use of our functions, for the growth of our inferior, for our hero to become more warrior-like, to become more less about its own glorification and more about actually contributing something, right? So, and the critic is really, in my opinion, the source, and this is also technically laid out in the relationships. It is the source of our responsibility. It is the thing that infuses our parent with drive, with the willingness to be precise. And our relationship with our critic function, in my opinion, is at the end of the day the most consequential relationship within our own psyches, because the critic is like, in some ways, it's like the rudder of a boat, right? It is where it goes, the path that it walks on, whether it moves towards wisdom and trying to, holding out for something worth living for still. It's kind of a lot like someone who's worked their whole career and then retired, right? After you retire, are you going to be, are you going to decay? Are you going to stagnate? Or are you going to contribute every day to a cause that's still worth fighting for, that's still worth investing in, right? This path from the critic determines the overall path of our psyche. So dealing with our own critic is very important, but this topic is more so dealing with other people's critic, right? I think we've beat the self-improvement pill into the ground so far, especially with Ego Hack Your Fear, where we go into each of the functions in depth, especially the critic function. But now we're going to point outward a little bit and say, how do I deal with other people's critic function? And the consequences of, if you can skillfully interact with other people's critic, it transcends the context of the relationship, whether it's business, friends, coaches, teachers, students, an intimate partner, family, right? The importance of learning to skillfully interact with the critic function, with other people's critic function, is extremely, extremely vital. So I'm really excited to dig into this with you guys and to go over each of the critic functions in individual videos, and then kind of keep the discussion going of, especially I think towards the end of it, being aware that the critic is really just looking for innocence and to be childlike at the end of the day, and that if you can cultivate respect with a person, you can help their critic experience that joy again, which is something they may be starting to believe is not possible for them, right? So anyway, that's the intro. Thanks for tuning in. We're excited. I'm excited to move forward with this. And anyway, if you guys remember the person that posted that comment a couple years ago, please let me know down below. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and we'll see you in the next video.